So your father, Roy Benavidez, call sign Tango Mike Mike, aka that mean Mexican. Hello and welcome to the Brothers and Sisters Like These podcast. I'm your host, Brother Miliano. Today, our guest is Yvette Benavidez Garcia, daughter of Medal of Honor recipient Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez. Yvette, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure is all ours. So, for brevity's sake, let me give the listeners a little bit of introduction and a summary of your father's life. And when I'm done, please fill in any blanks, okay?
Okay.
So, your father, Roy Benavidez, call sign Tango Mike Mike, aka that mean Mexican, is one of the most famous soldiers of modern times. He received the nation's highest honor, which is the Medal of Honor for bravery during his service in Vietnam. One of the most incredible acts of physical and moral strength ever known to man, certainly in modern history. He faced incredible challenges both on and off the battlefield as a civilian and on more than one occasion in the military, not just for the actions of his Medal of Honor. After he retired from the military, he continued to serve the population and the community through his actions as a civilian, his advocacy for youths and underprivileged, underrepresented populations, and to explain the benefits and the opportunities that the military gave him, the importance for a need for an education. So his legacy is one of incredible magnitude and depth, one that has reached and touched every facet of both civilian and military life. And he's one of only a few modern soldiers that has been so impactful both on and off the battlefield. And so to summarize his life, he was raised in Texas in a poor family and faced many struggles growing up with his younger brother. He was orphaned with both parents by the age of 7. He moved live with his uncle and their large family. He ended up dropping out of school to help support the family. Then he joined the Texas National Guard, spent then 3 years on active duty and served in the infantry in South Korea. Then went to MP school and at Fort Bragg was an airborne MP. Deployed to Vietnam as an MP while leading a patrol with South Vietnamese forces. Stepped on a landmine, went to the hospital, and after months and months of physical therapy, was slated to be released from the military for his wounds. And he struggled every night to do his own physical therapy so that he not only could walk again, but return to active duty. Then at Bragg, he went special forces, deployed to Vietnam with the Special Operations Group, which was special forces, and then is known for, among other things, a 6-hour huge firefight that happened, one of many that happened in Vietnam, for which he received the Medal of Honor. And then after that, he maintained his champion of veterans, like we said earlier, of underprivileged youth, and really advocated for what the military could bring young soldiers. And especially being of Latino descent, that was not easy for him growing up in the military, but was incredibly helpful for the Army, for the military, to show that someone like him from his background could excel in the military. And he, I think, is safe to say, embodied, what a true warrior both on and off the battlefield was. And he has spurred an entire generation of warfighters, especially in the Army, to go be special forces, but overall is a huge light in our environment, in our community. So please, Yvette, let me know what I missed, if anything.
Well, in a nutshell, yes, that encompasses his life. but he was much more than that. As you know, he was a father, and people didn't see the struggles and the challenges that he had in life. But we, his children, I'm one of three. I'm one of his daughters. I have a sister and a brother. We had to live with our father, and it becomes very overwhelming as a child of somebody who has the magnitude of you know, everything that he went through, and how people see him as a hero even to this day. It becomes very overwhelming to have to carry that legacy for him, because I know people want to still be inspired and encouraged by his story and by his sacrifice. But you pretty much hit the nail on the head.
Okay, thank you. It's not easy to summarize someone of his legacy, and like you said, and being a veteran and a veteran nonprofit here, there are many levels and layers to us as veterans, and so this is just one aspect of it. And why we wanted to have you on was to show one layer, which is the family, the children, the relatives that also face so many challenges through the veteran service. And so his heroic life and military experience is very well documented. And there's three books that he wrote himself. But what we wanted to focus here was more of kind of the family and the toll and the experiences and the growth that you in particular have made, and make that kind of representation to make other people aware that behind every veteran is a family, whether
Right.
he's a hero or has just served his time honorably for however, or her time honorably for however long. All that always impacts the family. It's just a question of how
Exactly.
much. So
Exactly. And a lot of people do,
mm,
you know, for lack of a better word, forget about the descendants of these heroes and the families, the wives, the spouses who give up a lot as well. And so I thank you for the opportunity, because it's been a couple of years now, well, more than a couple, but when I first realized what my mission, I guess, in life, what my purpose in life was, and that was to carry on my father's legacy. And at the time that I chose to do that, and the reason why I chose to do that was because I had an epiphany, a moment where I realized, had my father not survived the 6 hours in hell that he went through in the Vietnam War, I would have never been born. And so that had a profound effect on me. I had an aha moment at the time that I realized that wow, I shouldn't be here today. And I am here because of his service and sacrifice. And so, how can I give back to my father who had already passed away? How can I honor his legacy? What can I do? Because if my siblings, if we don't do something, then his legacy is going to die. And nobody will remember. And so it was at that moment that I thought, I have to speak his name. I have to get his story out there. I have to let others know and remember of the sacrifice and service that he did.
well, thank you for that. And that's really what motivates us here. Is part of it is we write therapeutically, but it's also to keep legacy alive, because it's only one generation away from all being forgotten. And when we're forgotten, then our veteran care is forgotten, our rights and privileges are forgotten too. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's very important that we keep our legacy of service alive. And your father's is, a prime example because of how heroic he was in his military and even civilian life, and how important and how much he's contributed to that. But again, we want to also remember that there's a price that the entire family nucleus pays on behalf of that veteran. And so while we
Yes.
are very happy and honored to speak to you as the daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient, we also want to really understand your personal experiences with it, because it's something that is so important to be memorialized as well, and often just simply not ever addressed in the public realm. So having said that, if you don't mind, if you feel comfortable, if you could describe some of the physical and emotional challenges that you saw your father faced that you knew that he had in his life, growing up? So I can imagine, for example, being Latino and getting into the military must have been, maybe not at the Texas, well, maybe at the Texas National Guard level, but poverty, PTSD. What signs did you see in him that you realized were coming from his past life story, whether it's civilian and or military?
Right. Well, my dad obviously had a lot of challenges in life. You had mentioned earlier that he had lost both of his parents by the time he was 7. I think by the time he was 10, his mom had passed away. So his dad passed away first, and then his mom did of tuberculosis. So by the time he was 10, he had both of his parents missing in his life, and that in itself is a huge challenge. But he was adopted by an aunt and uncle, so he was raised by a loving family. So he had that. He had poverty. My dad lived in an era where poverty was obviously going on with a lot of families, but my dad was very poor, and he talked about at times where he didn't have money to even buy shoes, and so the shoes that he had holes in them, and he would put cardboard at the bottom of his soles of the shoes so that he could walk comfortably. So I always knew that my dad had come from this type of background. I always knew that he had been discriminated against because of the color of his skin. I knew he had been picked on because of his size and because he had a lazy eye. So I knew that my dad was that kid who didn't have a chance at life. He was being hit by all of these different things: poverty, racism, discrimination, no parents, being adopted, having a single parent at one point. So I grew up knowing that my dad had all of these struggles. And I also knew that he was a fighter. If you looked at him wrong, he had a bad attitude, he would want to fight you. And he was one day away from going to a boys' home. And one of the authors writes about that. Because of his behavior. So I always knew that he had these challenges. He didn't really harp on them when we were growing up, but we knew that they existed, and he just lived his life. Just his presence and just knowing that he had hardships in life, you knew that you wanted to do better and be better because of his experiences. He took us on vacations because he knew he never had that opportunity. He always reminded us to eat all of our food that was put on the table because, again, he came from a background that didn't have a lot of food, and so they struggled to eat. So my dad subtly would remind us of the things that he struggled through in life by incorporating it into the way that he raised us.
Okay, that makes perfect sense that he really kind of lived the mantra of the military in his civilian life. Carried with him through every day and was expressed in you guys' relationship. And so, on that similar note, what would you feel that some of the challenges that you faced because of your father's service, not only because of the Medal of Honor, but also just being in the military? What would experiences do you think set you apart from, say, other civilians?
Well, living with a father, obviously, who had gone through two, active duties in the Vietnam War. And the first one, as you explained earlier, he was paralyzed from the waist down. So he had some physical challenges. And then the second one, which was the 6 hours in hell, and what he went through, almost being zipped up in a body bag and dying and suffocating to death, and just living with the post-traumatic disorder, stress disorder of having to relive the effects of war. I think as a child, I had to live, and my siblings and I, we had to live with the ripples of those wars and everything that he went through. I saw him struggle to get out of bed because his muscles were tensing up. I saw that he struggled to walk. I saw that he couldn't get into a standing position from a sitting position, that he struggled to do that. I saw the scars on his body. He had a scar that went from the front of his abdomen all the way to the back. So it was half of his stomach had a scar. And I saw that scar. I saw the scar that he had on his lip that he received from the butt of the rifle when he was, stabbed at. I saw the physical wounds. I saw the emotional toll that it took on him. I saw that the what his eyes looked like when he spoke about his brothers in arms, when he had to relive every story that he told when he would get up on stage and he would go speak to people. I saw the effects that it had on his eyes. People may not have seen that, but even in videos that I see today, I can see it in his eyes that he is having to relive what he went through. And what people don't know is that it pained him psychologically to do that. Mentally, it pained him to do that. And he even told me once that he did not like going up there and speaking, even though he would never know it because he was such an eloquent speaker and such a motivational speaker. But it came from within because he knew he was saving lives by doing that. He knew that he was helping other veterans. He knew that he was being an inspiration to that one person who may have needed it. So, yeah, I did see that. I saw the shrapnel that was embedded in his body that was making its way out of his body. I remember being a little girl sitting in the back seat. My spot was behind him in the driver's seat, and that was my spot. And I remember as we're driving down the road, I remember seeing coming from the back of his head blood, and it was dripping. And I told him, "Hey, Dad, you're bleeding. The back of your head is bleeding." And he would just reach back there and pull out a piece of shrapnel, and it had finally made its way out of his head. But I saw that, I saw these wounds of war. I saw him limp every time that he walked. I didn't understand the weight of the war and the weight of the metal. I didn't understand it, if that makes sense, but I saw it. I saw it. And then as an adult in my journey to get to know my dad since his passing, I learn and I understand a little bit more each and every day.
And so, do you think there was anything that helped your father with healing from these military experiences? You know, talking about it can be very difficult because it does rehash these emotions, and some
Right.
of them are unresolved because you're talking about people who've passed away, and it's very difficult to relive those emotions. But did you find that he had any solace in anything to alleviate some of the anguish and torment of his past?
Well, faith and family. My dad never, never, ever wavered in his faith. He never skipped a mass that I know of, and even on
Even on
the
that
the
day.
6 hour in hell mission, he was attending a
Mm.
a mass, a service, which the top of the hood of a Jeep was the makeshift altar, and so he always had God in his life, never wavered in his faith. Family, he had my mother always by his side. He had his brother Roger. He had his other siblings. He had us, his children, later in life. But I think what probably did, even though I talked about how it pained him to speak about it, it was also therapeutic in the same sense, if that makes sense. Um, Talking to other veterans and being asked to go speak to other veterans and military groups and being asked to speak to civic organizations and even students, it was therapeutic for him in a way. And he was able to probably touch on some healing aspects because he knew when he walked away from those engagements that he was inspiring and encouraging kids to stay in school, to stay off of drugs, to stay out of gangs. He knew that he was inspiring them. And then, of course, writing. He wrote about it in 3 books. He co-authored 3 books. Writing for me is very therapeutic, and I know for him it must have been because he co-authored 3 books. But also every single piece of mail that came through our household, he made it his mission to answer. So he was always writing, and he made sure that everybody who wrote to him got a picture and a card and or a letter back with personal handwritten stories and words of inspiration. So I know all of that helped him,
in some way or
to
manner or
heal.
fashion. Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's how our nonprofit started. It originally started with Vietnam veterans, like your father, who, we had a regular physician. I say we as the nonprofit, a regular physician who could tell something was just not missing. Mental health counseling, uh, pharmacological aspects of it was still just not healing it. And so, in North Carolina, every year the state has a poet who mission is to kind of educate and spread and promote poems and education and kind of get a pet project. And so this pet project became, well, let's see if there's something that we could do with writing that could maybe heal things that these guys who are kind of a different generation. So they're not as talkative, not as expansive about their emotions, but it's easier when you write it down and you can go write it down somewhere and bring it, and then read it. And so what they did was
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
they just formed a group amongst themselves. It was only males, combat veterans. It was called Brothers Like These. And afterwards, they published their readings from the several sessions, 8 sessions that they did. And from that, they decided to make a nonprofit. But, much to their credit, they said, we had plenty of nurses. A lot of them are Purple Heart. And so they had plenty of nurses, and they're like, hey, we really need to include our women veterans. And so they
Yeah.
actually started it, Brothers and Sisters Like These. And now we, do regular group meetings. We have a couple of new writing classes that are starting right now, actually, and we plan on doing women's only edition. And what we do is we publish these stories so that we can sell and fund our classes, and then we actually hit the road and do a lot of public speaking events. And it's therapeutic for us because we get to talk about our experiences, but it's also educational. So it's in similar manner like what your father was doing, just so that we can promote awareness within the civilian population and amongst the key leaders of our nation. And so our fourth volume, we plan on having a women's only edition so that we can kind of highlight the particular aspects that being a female veteran has presented itself. And so, we're constantly evolving as well. And I think your father was on the cutting edge of his time because he, being Latino and being from a very challenging background, became the face of a war that was very unpopular. So, in my research and thinking about his impact, him hitting the road the way he did, not only as we see promoted veteran benefits that were on the table on the chopping block, but he also humanized a war that was very unpopular in the American people. And they saw that notwithstanding the unpopularity, there are plenty of people who are willing to risk everything
Yeah.
for a brother and sister who may not look like
And
them,
for
may
our
not.
freedom. Yeah.
Exactly. For everyone who's back home, even not happy
Yeah.
with a war, but they saw that in him, and I think he was incredibly influential in seeing that this incredible, special forces, incredibly heroic, but yet was so graceful and so well spoken.
Hmm.
So I think he really helped humanize the Vietnam experience. And I'm not so sure I've really heard it characterized that way, but that's the takeaway that I got. Have you ever thought about it or heard about it in that particular way?
Yeah, I have most recently because, I started posting on social media sites because I felt like, well, this is the way to get his word out, his message, his story. And so I get hundreds of thousands of comments every day. And I would love to just answer them all, but it's just impossible and it's very overwhelming. But when I do set time aside to read and answer. That is a lot of the comments that I get, is that I met your father and I had a drink with him, or we had breakfast together, or I invited him over to my house and my wife made dinner, or my mom made, it was a young kid and kids were inviting my dad over to meet their parents and my dad would go. And I mean, it's just like he was so personable, and I see that personable aspect, and so my word to describe him is that he was very intentional. He wanted you to know that you were the person he was speaking to. He was very intentional about that. He wanted you to know that I'm speaking to you, that you are important, that I'm not just answering your question and shaking your hand or shaking my head and, nodding and just appeasing you. I'm
Really
listening to
engaged
you.
and
I'm
focused on you.
hearing
Mhm.
you. I'm talking to you. And so I get that so much. And I always kind of relate it to other people that I see in society, and not to bash them or badmouth them, because, we all have our reasons for why we do what we do. But I don't see that a lot with these influencers that we admire or look up to. It's very few and far between that you see them engaging in conversation. And my dad did. My dad went out afterwards from a speaking engagement, and if you invited him over, he was going to come over. And so I get that a lot, and I'm proud to say that that was my dad. And it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, being global war and terror, Iraq, Afghanistan, combat veteran, I was airborne infantry with the 82nd Airborne Division, and we have plenty of Medal of Honor recipients and incredible acts of heroism. I will say that only a few examples were of the magnitude of like your father in terms of engagement, because ours was mostly counterinsurgency, even though Vietnam was too, but that was a little more force on force. However, I will say we have plenty of incredible stories, but I will say
Yeah.
the difference that I think of your father's generation, our generation, is that we are right now oversaturated and overwhelmed with social media, with internet. So these stories get drowned out a little bit. And there's also a bit of glossing with Hollywood production and stuff like that. But
Right.
what I think is your father was when this was a much more rare event and opportunity to be heard. So, as a veteran, and I think we're all very fortunate that it was your father to be one of these extremely well known people, because even today, maybe his story would not have been able to have touched in the same way just because of the dynamics of how social media is today.
Right. And I'm very thankful that, I've been able to help carry on his legacy, and that my brother and sister have too. But you're right. I mean, it could have gotten lost. And we have to continue to speak. I mean, I still get people who message me saying, I just heard about your dad, adults who are well into their, 40s, 50s, and 60s, who are just now saying, I never knew of your father's story, and it came across my media feed and I saw it, and now I'm hooked, and I want to learn as much as I can. So we have to continue to share these stories and speak their name, and just get the word out that these are men and women who have awesome, extraordinary stories to tell. They lived their life in a particular war, and or whatever it is that they did, and we need to help to carry on their legacies.
It's a great point. Thank you. So, a term that's more recently been used is post traumatic growth. And what it is the traditional model of addressing past PTSD was through various forms of counseling, which really look at addressing the past. But post traumatic growth has been shown very important to kind of live in the future and the present versus just the past. So, in a way, whether your father was consciously doing it or not, I do see a lot of post traumatic growth in what he did to promote, the values of bravery, camaraderie, of honor, and the benefits that a figure like him can have on youth and politicians. So, is there anything that you think you have had in terms of post traumatic growth from maybe seeing your father at a young age, which might have been either traumatic or challenging to see him, in those conditions, or to think of what he's been through? Is there something that, for example, having these conversations or something that you would consider kind of a post traumatic growth from that childhood?
Well, yes. When I write and speak about it as well, I'm coming from a place where I'm remembering what my father, the sacrifices and all the experiences that he's gone through life. And as an educator, I see that in my students. I see those kids who are struggling to read and to write. My dad was a dropout. I see those kids who are aggressive in the classroom, who want to fight, who want to throw things, who are falling asleep, who aren't learning, who are falling behind. My dad as well was one of those students. He was a migrant worker who went out to the fields and picked cotton and had to go before school to pick cotton and then go to school, and then after school went back out and worked. So, my father wasn't understanding and receiving the full education that a student should receive. So I see that. I see all of the things that my father endured in life. I see that in current people today. And so by speaking and writing about it and telling of his story, I'm hopefully able to relate to them and inspire them and say, look, you don't have to fit a certain mold in order to be successful in life. You can, if you're struggling right now, you're going to in school, you're going to ISS, you're always getting into trouble, you're being getting kicked out of school, you're getting picked on or bullied. My dad was picked on because of his height. My dad was picked on because he had a lazy eye. you know I try to relate those stories of my father to modern day issues because it's happening even today. And if my dad can do a 180 and turn his life around and become the person that he eventually became, an American icon, a military war hero, then anybody can do it. My dad was paralyzed from the waist down, did his own therapy to regain muscle, to regain the ability to walk again. If my, and of course, this isn't going to happen in all instances, but if my dad can do that, then whatever you're struggling with, you can get the help that you need as well, and you can do it. I see a lot of people who don't want to come to school. They hate school. They'd rather be on their phones at home and be on social media. And I'm like, don't let that define who you are. Get an education because it's free. You do have teachers who are willing and ready and able to teach you. Get as much education as you can, and then do what you need to do later, but don't give up. My father never gave up. He didn't let the color of his skin define who he was. He didn't let the fact that he came from a poor household, poverty, define who he was. He didn't let discrimination, bigotry, hatred. He didn't let his bad attitude define who he was. So hopefully, by speaking about it and by writing about it, and helping people to understand what the cost is for freedom, for the freedoms that we enjoy, that I'm helping with that growth that you talk about.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about the military and your father really is one of several poster childs is that the military, due to its nature of mission first, has always been the first to desegregate or give more opportunities to those that the rest of society has been able not to afford because they can figure out how to get around it without them. But the military, is by nature much more uh, full of camaraderie and full of mission, where you just don't have the luxury to worry about who's on your right or
Yeah,
left. It's just that person.
exactly.
And that's certainly what motivated your father on that morning after or during mass to be prepared to lay down his life for someone, for anybody else, and wouldn't have mattered. And we have many members that have faced discrimination, whether it's gender or racial, but they do have quite a few stories of in combat how that was completely lost
Of
because of the
course, yeah,
humanity.
because you're in full armor and you have no idea what race or nationality or sexual orientation the person who you're fighting with side by side is, and that doesn't matter. We shouldn't let that be an issue. And so you're right. You're my dad had a job to do. He signed up, he took an oath. He was going to defend his country and fight for the freedom that we enjoy today. And that's all that mattered. Nothing else. Our kids are not fully understanding the price of freedom, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual price that was paid for their freedoms. Because they don't understand the sacrifices, then we're missing something, and I see it, sadly, I see it far too often, and it's just sad.
And your father has mentioned in several speeches that that was something that did bother him. And what I find
Yes,
incredible is that of perhaps his experiences of being so disadvantaged and yet finding opportunity and professionalism through the military really raised his sense of honor and community to another level that may or may not have happened had it not been for his service. But I think it's safe to say was enhanced by that. And that's part of the reason why serving in the military is so important. Even if it's just one tour, you've done your piece for society, and you've
yeah,
borne the burden that others would have to bear, and you get to meet people and experiences that you would never have otherwise done. So it makes you a better, well-rounded individual, and it makes you return.
absolutely.
Yeah, and it makes you return to society where you can kind of you know explain to your children, your family, or your loved ones what it means to have sacrificed for 4 years or for 40 years.
Right, and I do get comments, and I know people don't mean to make the comments that they do, but I see it when I see people comparing their service to my father's, or how they might say, well, I was in the military, but I didn't do what your dad did, or I only served 1 year or 2 years, or and to me, or to my dad, to our family, that we don't want to compare. The fact that these men and women are signing up and taking an oath, and for however long they're in, for whatever reason they're in, um, that's paramount. And it's paramount. It should be paramount for each and every person. My father would have never compared his years of 24 service to any other person. So I don't want people to do that, because everybody's amount of service and years that they did is just as important as the person who spent a career 25, 30 years in the military.
Well, I see your father's legacy to be very and story to be very relevant even to today, because it's one
It
of
is.
yeah today, perhaps more than ever, because it is one of adversity, of personal sacrifice, of surpassing obstacles, both physical, emotional, mental, and also a
Absolutely.
post-traumatic growth of returning that tenfold back to society, especially in a war that was unlike the ones that I had to fight in. It was very unpopular. So I believe his story is more than relevant, today and perhaps forever, because it's basically a human story. It's of being a
Hmm.
warrior and a citizen and a family man, which is really all encompassing, because that's what it
Right.
takes to make the world go round. So
Right.
how do you see your father's legacy continuing to live in today's world?
um Well, I mean, I'm glad it's still alive and well. I feel like I have my siblings and I to thank, and the people who continue to share his stories. But it's a lot of hard work, for us to post what we post. I'm the administrator of all my dad's social media sites, so it's a lot of work. It's not just something that takes about an hour to do. I try to be intentional, but I'm glad I see it being relevant, because there are so many people who are down and out on with themselves, who have fear, worry, panic, anxiety. And my dad had that never quit, never give up attitude. And so, my dad put on an armor to fight physically. He put on an armor to fight. And then when he got out of the war, he was still putting on his armor to fight. And so I think it continues and transcends to today because so many people are struggling and they don't know what to do. And so when they hear his story and they hear me speak or they hear me tell them, put your armor on and fight, then that inspires them to do that. That they see that, oh, here was a man 45 years ago received the Medal of Honor, 60 years ago, earned the Medal of Honor, through his actions more than 60 years ago. And his message and his story is still saving lives. It's just incredible. He's been gone since 1998, but he's still, even in death, saving lives. So yeah, we got to continue to make him even more relevant. He's relevant. He needs to be more relevant.
and stay and remain relevant. Well, we've had a couple board members who've made them personally over the years, and I scored some brownie points with them having secured this interview with you, and they were very touched and very happy because it's that era is our foundation, and that legacy is also ours, and it's very
Yeah,
sad to see as the soldiers pass from the conflicts like World War II and Korea
yeah,
and now Vietnam that they're aging out of that too lose anything. And so that's why we make it, our mission to not only promote it as a healing mechanism, but also as an advocacy and kind of
yeah.
as educational for, the society that just simply doesn't know. So that's why we're also very happy and honored to have you here because it helps, believe it or not, well,
Thank you.
I know you understand, but it helps us actually by talking to, just like it helps, with Gold Stars. We have members here who died in Iraq when I was in Iraq, and being having them as honorary sisters here is very helpful because it's a way for us to heal and live,
Right.
together and support each other together. So even we've had a member that passed away, more than one, but we've kept their wives and they've become members because it's that kind of all encompassing. And I'm sure many feel the same way about you and your father, that you're, one and the same. And so are your siblings, right? It's not that much of a
Right.
separation for those that knew your father.
And I think, people need to see that he was a person, obviously a human, who struggled. And people see the eloquent speaker that he was, and he was, and they see the good writer that he was, and he was. They see all of the good, I think, because of the videos that are out there. But he was just a real person who had emotions, who had worries and fears and panics and anxieties, and had daily struggles, to walk, and physical struggles because of his injuries. And maybe people did see that when they got to meet him and shake his hand. But, I want people to know because we're all struggling in some form or fashion. And he was just like that.
And I want to thank you for that because that's very graceful, because part of also what we do is that we try to humanize our experiences. And there's this kind of Hollywood effect of everything's fine, but once you put the rifle down and you take the boots off, you put civilian clothes on, it's just not the same. And
Right.
people think, well, we supported you during the war, which was certainly my case of Iraq and Afghanistan, but those people bring back a lot of you know heavy burdens, and so that even having been supported at the time doesn't mean that they don't need continued support. And
Right.
so the way your father was able to show vulnerability, and the way also you're also able to characterize that, is very important because it allows people to understand that it's not all rosy, and you're on the battlefield
Right.
with the flag
Rainbows and
waving.
butterflies. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that it really does come with a cost. And it
Hmm.
comes with a cost for the family that could be even simply carrying on his legacy is a emotional, toll and burden because of the gravity
Hmm.
of it. You don't want to mess it up for what he's
Right.
done.
And I think us as children, I get, like I talked about it, it becomes very overwhelming to speak of what my father went through because I'm reminded of those struggles. And so, I have a heart and I have a caring heart, and it just makes me sad for the life that he led. And he was very stoic and honorable to not let us, his kids, see that side of him growing up. And it wasn't until after his death, and like I said, the journey that I'm on to get to know my father, that I started to put two and two together. Like I felt like he was very protective with how he lived his life when we were little, to
Like a
not
shield.
blow, to not show things, to not let, even though he struggled to get out of bed on certain days, but he still got up. You know what I'm saying? And he still walked his 5 miles every day. So he didn't let the little hiccup, if you want to call it, prevent him from still carrying on his daily life routine. And he was very, just like he was protective of his brothers in arms in the military, he was very protective of us as family and not letting us see those struggles. So that makes me sad to know as his daughter that he was, gosh, just giving it his all even then,
Yeah, and
for the
even
amount of time that we had him within
exactly,
our lives.
exactly. Well, that's just a testament, clearly, to him as an individual, and it
Absolutely.
seems that that determination and that honor and sense of just dignity is
Yeah.
something that was just ingrained by him. And
Yeah.
frankly, the military and those that he served with were just lucky that he was a part of the military, because
And I know the military men and women who are going to listen to this, they're going to get it. They know exactly what I'm talking about, and they get it. And it's the civilian people who may not, who will be inspired by that.
that's right. That's right. Thank you. So, Vet, do you have occasions or events or any way to participate or get in touch with you? Do you have anything that you do to promote your work with representing your father's legacy?
Yes, I, like I mentioned earlier, I am the administrator of all his social media sites. I took on that task right after he passed away. I volunteered to do that, and so I people can reach out to me. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, X. I'm on all the social media platforms. They can reach out to me by DMing me, direct messaging me on those sites, or they can email me at Yvette, Yvette, B as in Benavidez, Garcia at gmail.com. That they can reach out. They can make comments on all of my social media sites, my posts that I do. They can message me that way. Don't know if I'll see them all, but I do try to look as many of them as I can. But I'm always trying to get my dad's legacy out there. So any way that I can do it, any way that my brother and sister can do it, we're always trying to promote his legacy. If they ask us to do an interview for a school report, I've just completed two of them this past week. I got two in 1 week, and it was very different questions from two different students, very long questions. So I spent a lot of time working on that. But if you email me and ask me questions or to participate, we like to do that because we like to keep our father's legacy going. We are not going to let it die.
And at his, I believe it's his high school, isn't there still a scholarship in his honor?
Well, it's not his high school.
Oh, okay.
It's El Campo High School, and that is the when my father retired in San Antonio, he brought his family to El Campo, and this is the town that he raised all of us children in. His my mom's family was from here. His family was raised him here. So he wanted to come back to El Campo. So it is El Campo High School. And at the current time, this is the only place that we have a scholarship in his name. And we've had it since his passing. We've been able to give out scholarships every year. But we need for it to be funded, correct? So we do accept donations. Any and all amounts are appreciated, and they can send that to El Campo High School. The address is 600 West Norris Street, El Campo, Texas 77437. And I know you'll probably post that in an area for people to actually see
Yep,
that.
absolutely.
But yeah, but there are some other organizations who want to help out. And whenever they do help out, we ask if there's, when they ask if there's a scholarship or any kind of donation that we'd like for them to give the money to, we always refer them to my dad's scholarship. It's in his memory, and it's just something, a way that we can give back to our community.
It's a tangible way that there's a lot of benefits from that, from helping with education, which we know your father regularly talked about. Get an education, stay away
Yes,
from so-called friends, right? I think that, I mean,
right.
that's an incredible legacy. Imagine, how appropriate and touching that is, and
It
hearing
is.
you
And,
say that.
the man who raised him, his uncle, was told him, his grandfather actually, told him, tell me who you're with, and I'll tell you who you are. And so that's very relevant today because the people who you hang out with are going to, dictate how
Influence
you
you
behave in
and,
life.
yeah, your
Yeah, and
outcomes.
influence you.
Mhm. Um, I want to give you personally, Yvette, a call to action is that our brothers and sisters meets regularly in person and on Zoom. And what we do is we have two parts to our meetings. One is where we read something if we want to read, and the other is where we just do a buddy check, where we just talk about anything that's bothering us, always non political, non religious. We always invite people on who don't even have to say anything. They don't even have the camera on. Sometimes it's just a beginning process to just be here, other veterans be vulnerable, and build that trust before they can become a part of it. But my call to action to you is I offer you, if you would be our guest on one of these future Zoom calls, and I would love to do perhaps either a discussion with some of our members or even what we call fire drills, which is very short prompts that we'll write, that we only spend like 5 minutes, very condensed, but just to talk about some emotions or some feelings. I think it would be an eye opening experience and therapeutic for both the veterans and you to at the same time see what maybe one prompt, what emotions um, could elicit from that. Because,
Mhm.
for example, when we have our surviving spouses, one of them spoke as a caregiver also of the of the husband who passed away. And even though we have so much experience with that, she said things that we never would even have imagined from her perspective.
Right.
It was so enlightening. And this is what we do all day, every day. So you just don't know what could come out of it. But I hope that's something that we can arrange, at a good time for you to just,
Absolutely. I'd be honored. That would be
okay.
great.
Yeah. You never know what could come out of it, but
Yeah,
uh,
let me know when. I will be
of
there.
course, yeah, absolutely, and we do it regularly, and on a larger scale, you have an open invitation to Western North Carolina here in the mountains of Asheville. We foster a very loving community of veterans and families, and we have many different types of wellness retreats, from agrotherapy to equine therapy to riding therapy, and we'd love to host you and your family at any time. If you wanted to come by here, we would welcome you with open arms and would love to
That would be awesome.
have you spend some
Just
time here.
let me know when. You have my email, you have my phone number. Let me know and we can make it happen.
All righty. Well, our time has come to an end, and before I let you have the last word, as we always do here, I just wanted to sincerely thank you. your father, when I was a child, I excuse me here, but I saw him, and in some of our writings, one of our writings prompt was
Okay, you're going to get me emotional.
okay, I'm there. One of the writing prompts in one of our writing classes was to talk about your heroes. And I went home and I thought about it, and I was in a room full of mostly Vietnam veterans and Vietnam board members. And I thought, I remember growing up watching on TV these guys in their prime, in their 18, 19-year-old, giving up for draft, college, and family, and the horrors that they had to bring back to home. So I went home and I wrote that I saw my heroes on the news and in the accounts, that those heroes weren't in the room with me as adults. And the way that they carried themselves, the way that they didn't leave anybody behind, the way that they medevaced each other under incredible adversity and risk and death, was a legacy that made me a better soldier and created the standard for how all other military, whether you're a medic, a pilot, any category of battlefield soldier, was the standard. And I thank them for that. And I thank you and I thank your father for that, because that was engraved in me and engraved in how I behaved as a soldier on the battlefield in my days. And so for that, I thank you personally.
Well, thank you. But it's my dad. I'm just carrying on his story. My dad owes all the, I guess, thanks and admiration to for his unbreakable spirit, for his never quit attitude, and the fact that he was an advocate for our future generations and never gave up. So, thank you for saying that. But I'm only helping to carry on what my dad started. So thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor. So long live you, your family, and your
Thank
father.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Friends, at the next one, stay tuned and take care.